No, this was in London at the Dorchester in '65. This is what has been written by many people about that. But the point was, he took Mr. Munir Ahmed Khan. Mr. Usmani had been very good for the PAC. He had sent out some 600 people for PhDs. Munir Ahmed Khan, what he did was, he started indigenous training. People would train for 2 years, then they would go to Quaid-e-Azam for an MSc. Later on there was PIAS, which was our higher research institute, which is still the best, I think, certainly the best in the Muslim world and one of the best in the developing worlds. So he indigenized the program's technological human capability. At the same time, he built up all the infrastructure. When the Canadians didn't supply Kanab, we were able to mine the ore, fabricate the fuel. Later on, for centrifuge program, we could make the hexafluorine gas, we could turn it into metal, we could have the trigger group, etc. So he built up infrastructure. On the other side, he chose on the other side of the pole, and there was obviously a lot of creative tension between them. He chose Dr. A.Q. Khan for the centrifuge program. And I think the main thing about Dr. A.Q. Khan was he was basically an organizational genius. The Iraqis had 10 times more money, they were not able to reach anywhere. The Iranians have a tremendous amount of money, but their technological capability over the same span of time has not just been there. So he was able to put together the centrifuge program to give us the feedstock.
So what you are saying, it is that we were going on a dual route, the plutonium route as well as the uranium.
Well, now what I wanted to say was that they were complementary. The centrifuge program gave us the feedstock, but then you needed 25 other steps of the program, which the PAC was also doing. As far as the plutonium route and the enrichment, since the French had cancelled the reprocessing, etc. for technology, we obviously followed the enrichment route. I would say the only criticism that one can make of the Munir Ahmed Khan, not criticism, but anyhow of the PAC, was that the plutonium route, which you need for smaller weapons, they didn't begin construction of a reactor reportedly till '87. So that meant they spent 15 years delay, and maybe there was a lack of resources, etc. So that is why, for instance, now we have these issues of FMCT, etc.
Right. So talking about finances, you'd like to add something before that?
Yes,
please.
yes. I'd like to, in my opinion, in the 60s, even if we were to have a clear weapons program, it would have followed the plutonium route, because that was the only realistic route at that time. In the 60s, there was no question of a dual route, because the resources required for uranium enrichment in the 60s through the diffusion process or the electromagnetic separation were far out of our league, you see. It's only when the centrifuging process was developed subsequently, and Dr. A.Q. had the unique, that's where the second route came up. That was his contribution. PAC had always been following the standard plutonium route, as most other countries.
Right. But my question, sir, from you would be that since you were associated with it very closely and you're privy to so many secrets as such, which perhaps are no longer secrets, but how did we manage to finance it? I mean, 1971 we were battered, our eastern wing got dismembered, and not only our morale was low, we had just fought a very expensive war because India had invaded us in 1971. So how did Mr. Bhutto's charisma manage to produce all this financial support, sir?
Well, I think that is a credit which goes to him. I can't say more than that. But please remember that I think it's often forgotten that before this meeting, as we said in '74, the commission had been in existence for almost 16 years. And a lot of initial spade and foundational work had been done. The thing which takes time is the training of personnel, the establishment of basic facilities, and that had all been accomplished in the 60s. So that does not require necessarily the type of resources which later on were made available, but that needs time, and that time was usefully spent. It is not often realized that by the 70s, early 70s, there were almost 1,000 trained people That would take time, you see.
Okay.
This technology was totally unknown.
It was alien to us,
Yeah.
and as he mentioned that Usmani Sahib was sending people out for training abroad, and
That had to be done, you see, because earlier on, unless you first train that kernel of trainers, of senior scientists, how can you train your own people?
absolutely.
So these are natural stages, and the early part, in fact, I would say it was the Atoms for Peace program of Eisenhower, which provided the opportunity that we could learn about nuclear technology. I had the fortune, the very first course at Harwell, the UK AEA,
Mhm.
I got a chance to go into that. Then the very first power reactor course at Calder Hall, the Queen inaugurated that. And again, that was open for friendly foreign countries. We were the first to represent Pakistan. And then in 60 and 61, I spent 2 years at Oak Ridge under this Atoms for Peace program. That enabled us to learn reactor physics, nuclear technology, and only then the reactor school in Pakistan could be established and our own people trained. So this is a natural path which was followed.
So, Ambassador Tariq Usman Haider, you mentioned the French nuclear reactor, and Pakistan, or rather Mr. Bhutto, bent backwards to accommodate the safeguards that were demanded not only of France but of USA, because USA initially was opposed to it, and later on, because of the safeguards, it gave its consent. But I believe the moment we signed it, President Ford wrote a letter to Mr. Bhutto asking him to resign this agreement. You could perhaps throw some light on that, sir.
Well, it was not the nuclear plant, it was a reprocessing plant, the French reprocessing plant, which had been negotiated with them. It took quite some time. The French had asked for safeguards, IAEA safeguards. They were already agreed, they were there. They were even pursued safeguards there about technology. But then the French came under pressure from the Americans, and they resigned from the entire thing. So the reprocessing plant was never therefore built by them in that case. This is what happened in the end of the day. But I don't think that was the reason why we couldn't have gone into the plutonium route ourselves. We could have had a small reactor and a small reprocessing plant, which the Indians had done, for instance, etc.
And as has been done even here.
So how did we make up for this particular, shall I say, loss that the French declined?
Because by that time, the alternate uranium route had been opened up.
Okay.
Dr. A.Q. Khan was here, the engineering research labs, Kahuta labs were already functioning. So this, in fact, this is the US and the Western powers had concentrated their attention on stopping the plutonium route, not being fully aware that another route had been opened up, you see. And by the time they became aware, I remember one of the analysts, I happened to be in Washington, and we were having lunch, one of the analysts who deals with these programs on the US side, and I asked him that why is it that you are specifically focusing on Pakistan stopping to go into the nuclear side, and the same attention is not given to the Indian side. He said, look, let's be frank, you see. India is a horse which has bolted, and you are trying to bolt, and we are trying to bring down the barrier, you see. It's as simple as that. So it was a constant race, and as luck would have it, the attention of the West was towards stopping the plutonium program, which they were, and that gave Pakistan a few years in which to do all the foundational work on the centrifuge plant.
In fact, I wonder if you've read Shahidur Rahman's book, The Long Road to Chagai. He mentions it very clearly, and he gives the impression that perhaps Mr. Bhutto was ensuring that the world's attention is grabbed by the French route, the plutonium route, and meanwhile work could be processed on the uranium.
No, I don't think.